This is Sir Angus Deaton. He is a professor of economics and international affairs at Princeton University. In 2015, he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences for his analysis of consumption, poverty, and welfare. The decades he spent studying measures of global poverty culminated in his book The Great Escape: Health, Wealth, and the Origins of Inequality, which I will discuss in this video. If ever you are feeling negative about the state of affairs in the world, I suggest you read Deaton's book. The book chronicles the world's miraculous escape from poverty. Deaton outlines how on just about every meaningful measure, life has never been better. We live longer, we are healthier, we are happier, and we know more than we ever have. And even more importantly, things are continuing to improve. The first 6 chapters of the book teach you a lot about economics and are jam-packed with figures and statistics that will change the way you think about the world. Here are a few of those remarkable statistics. 1 in 2 girls born in the US today will live beyond 100 years. The share of people in extreme poverty, that is, earning less than $1.9 per day, decreased from 44% in 1981 to 11% in 2013. This incredible decrease in poverty was mostly driven by economic growth in China. This graph shows the relationship between happiness and income. To measure happiness, the Gallup organization asks people around the world to rate their lives by imagining a ladder of 11 steps. The bottom step, 0, is the worst possible life, while 10 is the best possible life. Each respondent is asked to indicate on which step of the ladder they feel they personally stand at the time. In this graph, income is represented as national income per head, or more precisely, gross domestic product per head. It shows the averages for the years 2007 through 2009. Income is measured in US dollars that have been adjusted for differences in price levels between countries. In the graph, income is presented on a 1, 4, 16, 64, 256 scale, known as a logarithmic scale. The linear relationship shows that equal percentage differences in income produce equal absolute shifts in life evaluation. So, a 10% pay increase in Ethiopia or India results in the same increase in happiness as a 10% pay increase in the United States or Australia. I particularly like this graph because it dispels the commonly held myth that money doesn't buy happiness. The idea that many people hold that those with simple lives in poor countries are just as happy or even happier than those spoiled by the trappings of modernity. I think we incorrectly conclude that money doesn't buy happiness because we don't actually see or interact with people at the bottom end of the income distribution. We look at our lives and observe that there isn't a great deal of difference in the happiness of rich people and poor people. In fact, many rich people seem comparatively unhappy. So it must be the case that money can't buy happiness. However, exposure to a wider range of wealth might be all we need to dispel ourselves of this delusion. In rich countries like Australia, we fail to appreciate that the poor people we interact with are unfathomably rich by historical and global standards. For example, the average person living in Australia today is in the top 1% of global income. Even someone on the Australian minimum wage of $27,000 per year is in the top 3% of global earners. When you make cross-country comparisons like this, you start to get a sense of just how fortunate we are. Our perceptions of what it is like to live the simple life of a poor person is surely skewed. Indeed, there is nothing enjoyable about watching your child die of malaria, diarrhea, or AIDS. There is nothing enjoyable about suffering through 12-hour days of back-breaking farming. And there is certainly nothing enjoyable about coming home to communities with homicide rates that make the rough neighbourhoods in Australia look like kindergarten playgrounds. As Deaton outlines in splendid detail, the history of economic growth indicates that with some qualifications, it alleviates human misery, improves human happiness and opportunity, and lengthens human lives. Wealthier societies have better living standards, better medicines, and offer greater autonomy and fulfillment. Indeed, the splendors of the modern world really do contribute to our well-being. Accordingly, understanding the mechanisms through which economic growth is created or destroyed is of the utmost importance. In the last chapter of his book, Deaton attempts to answer this question: how do we help those who have been left behind? Deaton's answer to the question of how to help the world's poor will almost certainly surprise you. Rather than stressing some ethical imperative to help the world's most desperately poor, he makes the case that we should be doing less, not more, to help. After examining the history of GDP growth in countries that get aid, he concludes that aid doesn't cause growth. Rather, Deaton argues that aid actively keeps poor countries from growing. His basic argument, which I tend to agree with, is that foreign aid undermines the connection between governments and their people. The leaders of countries that get a lot of aid worry more about what their donors think than what their citizens think. Accordingly, one of the most compassionate things we can do is stop giving aid. Instead, Deaton suggests that effort could be better spent persuading local governments to stop policies that hurt poor people and support international policies that make globalization work for poor people, not against them. For example, doing away with subsidies for local farmers that make it impossible for overseas farmers to compete, or removing restrictions on overseas manufacturing, which would allow developing countries to participate in global markets. While you might not agree with all of Deaton's criticisms of foreign aid, I definitely think it is a message worth hearing, in particular for people from the effective altruism movement. That is, people who think deeply about how to do the most good they can. Taken together, I enjoyed this book a lot. It takes you on a sweeping journey of the last 250 years of economic growth, as well as down into the weeds of economic analysis. The central message of the book is that today's disproportionately unequal world is the product of an unbelievable period of sustained economic growth. Growth that is rapidly including more and more of the world's citizens, but also growth that is by no means guaranteed to continue.